This image shows Hitler negotiating with the Soviet Foreign Minister Molotov in November 1940, plotting the treacherous moves of the Second World War. But look closely at what is looming right there on the wall behind them. It is a painting of a wooden boat gliding silently across black, motionless water, leaving absolutely no ripples in its wake. A hunched oarsman rows toward a sheer-cliffed island choked by dark, towering cypress trees. In the center of the boat stands a solitary figure draped in heavy white cloth, and at their feet lies a coffin. There is no horizon here. The sky and the sea merge into an endless void. This is Isle of the Dead, painted by the Swiss artist Arnold Böcklin in the late 19th century. It's an image quietly woven into the DNA of modern visual culture, but Adolf Hitler did not just have a print of it. He was so utterly consumed by Böcklin's vision that in 1933 he purchased this original third version of the painting. He hung it in his private mountain retreat, the Berghof, and later moved it to the new Reich Chancellery in Berlin, where this chilling photograph was taken. But the most fascinating thing about this painting isn't just its haunting presence in the lair of a dictator. It is the terrifyingly diverse spell it cast over the minds of those who looked at it. By the dawn of the 20th century, three figures who would go on to brutally shape the modern world all held a deep, obsessive admiration for this exact same image. While Hitler was mesmerized by the original, Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis, had a print of it hanging proudly in his study in Vienna. Vladimir Lenin, the architect of the violent Russian Revolution, kept a reproduction in his private room. How does one single painting appeal to a healer of the human mind, an intellectual communist revolutionary, and a genocidal fascist dictator? How can three men from the absolute opposite ends of the ideological spectrum find profound meaning in the same arrangement of oil paint? The answer lies in what the painting refuses to do. It refuses to speak. Böcklin engineered a visual silence so complete, so overwhelmingly absolute, that the painting functions as a psychological mirror. When you stand before it, the painting does not tell you a story. It forces you to confront your own internal monologue. It is a masterpiece of ambiguity. Böcklin despised explaining his work. When pressed by critics and patrons to reveal the meaning of this island, he stated only that a painting should be so still that you would be startled by a simple knock on the door. He didn't want viewers to understand his images, he wanted them to enter them. And to understand how he achieved this hypnotic threshold, we have to look at how this haunting image was actually born. In the spring of 1880, Böcklin was living in Florence, Italy, when a grieving young widow named Marie Berna visited his studio. She had recently lost her husband to diphtheria, and she was searching for something to anchor her immense sorrow. While browsing the studio, her eyes landed on an unfinished canvas resting on an easel. It depicted a rocky, desolate island with dark trees, a place of profound isolation. She asked Böcklin if he could transform this landscape into a memorial for her late husband. Böcklin agreed, and it was at her request that he made the crucial additions that would turn a mere landscape into a cultural phenomenon. He painted in the small rowboat in the foreground. He added the oarsman. He painted the coffin. And most importantly, he added the solitary, shrouded figure in white, representing Marie herself, journeying into the world of shadows. When he finished, he wrote to her, promising that the painting would allow her to dream herself into the world of dark shadows. He initially didn't even give it a title. It was simply a picture for dreaming over. But a private expression of grief rarely stays private if it touches upon a universal nerve. Between 1880 and 1886, Böcklin was commissioned to paint the Isle of the Dead 5 separate times, each version slightly different in its lighting, its mood, and its medium. The first version, housed today in Basel, is quiet and melancholic. But by the time he painted the third version in 1883, the one that would eventually hang behind Adolf Hitler, the mood had shifted. The sky became more turbulent, the lighting more dramatic, the shadows sharper. The island seemed less like a peaceful resting place and more like an ominous, proto-surrealist fortress. And thanks to an incredibly successful etching made by the artist Max Klinger in 1883, the image went entirely viral. By the year 1900, it was said that a reproduction of the Isle of the Dead hung in almost every middle-class home in Germany. Young men carried postcards of it into the mud and blood of the trenches during the First World War. Why did an entire society suddenly obsess over an image of a graveyard? Because the late 19th century was suffocating. The Industrial Revolution was tearing across Europe, replacing ancient connections to nature with dirty, mechanized cities and a creeping paranoia that humanity was losing its soul. While the dominant art movements of the time were busy documenting this physical world, capturing the exact way sunlight hit a haystack, or the gritty reality of physical labor, Böcklin offered an escape hatch. He became the unintentional godfather of the symbolists, a group of artists who believed the only reality worth painting was the invisible one. They didn't care about the light of the sun. They wanted to capture the shadows of the human mind. Böcklin gave a fractured society a physical manifestation of its lost connection to the sublime. Historians have spent decades trying to pinpoint his island on a map, guessing it might be a rocky outcrop near Corfu or the dark cypress-covered mound of the English cemetery in Florence. But looking for geographical coordinates misses the point entirely. The Isle of the Dead isn't a physical place you can visit. It is an archetype, a piece of the collective unconscious dragged up and painted onto the canvas. This brings us back to our paradox, the dictator and the psychoanalyst. When Sigmund Freud looked at this impenetrable silence, he saw the perfect visual articulation of his concept of Thanatos, the death drive. He understood that the painting tapped into a deep, unconscious human desire to return to an inorganic state, a secret yearning for profound, undisturbed rest away from the noise of existence. But when Adolf Hitler looked at the very same image, he didn't see peaceful sleep. He projected nihilistic grandiosity. In the sheer cliffs and towering cypresses, Hitler saw an aesthetic of absolute power and total finality. This is the danger of a masterpiece built entirely on ambiguity. It absorbs whatever you bring to it. The quiet void engineered to comfort a grieving widow was hijacked into a tool for domination. Today, when you look at that third version hanging in Berlin, that dark knowledge is inescapable. You cannot unsee the gaze of the dictator who once stared back at it. The painting survives, but the context has turned it into a monster. Yet, the legacy of the Isle of the Dead transcends the political horrors of the 20th century, bleeding heavily into the realm of sound and moving images. In Paris, the brilliant Russian composer Sergei Rachmaninoff saw a black and white reproduction of the painting. He had never even seen the true colors of Böcklin's original work, but the stark geometry and the suffocating atmosphere moved him so deeply that he composed a massive symphonic poem titled after the painting. If you listen to Rachmaninoff's piece, the music is written in a highly unusual 5/8 time signature. Why? Because it perfectly mimics the relentless, asymmetrical, rhythmic pull of the oarsman dipping his oars into the heavy, dark water. Pull, glide, pull, glide. The music forces you into the boat with the shrouded figure. Interestingly, Rachmaninoff later saw the actual color painting and admitted that if he had seen the colors first, he probably never would have written the music. The black and white reproduction had allowed his imagination to fill in the dread, proving once again that the power of this artwork lies in the blank spaces it leaves for the audience. That same atmospheric dread laid the foundational blueprint for modern visual storytelling. You can trace a direct, unbroken line from the dark shores of Böcklin's Island to the nightmares of contemporary cinema. The surrealist painter Salvador Dalí painted his own homages to it. H.R. Giger, the visionary artist who designed the xenomorph for the movie Alien, created his own terrifying versions of the island. Director Martin Scorsese explicitly referenced its towering cliffs and ominous approach in his psychological thriller Shutter Island. Even the legendary animator Hayao Miyazaki tipped his hat to it in his late-career masterpiece, The Boy and the Heron. In every instance, the visual shorthand is the same. When a character approaches an island of tall, dark trees rising from still water, you know, on an instinctual level, that they are crossing a boundary. They are leaving the realm of the living and entering the realm of memory, trauma, and the afterlife. When you really break down the composition, Böcklin's genius becomes blindingly clear. Look at the balance of the piece. It is aggressively structured on verticals and horizontals. The flat, unending line of the sea grounds the painting, while the tall, straight cypresses and the carved doorways drag your eyes upward. There are almost no organic, sweeping curves to comfort you. The color palette is incredibly restrained. Deep blues, bruised violets, the blackish green of the trees, and then, striking against all of that darkness, the blinding, spectral white of the shrouded figure and the coffin. But perhaps the most unsettling detail of all is the water. The boat is clearly in motion. The oarsman is actively rowing. But look closely at the hull of the boat where it meets the sea. There are no wakes. There are no ripples. The water does not react to the physical presence of the boat. It is as if the boat, the coffin, and the figure do not physically exist. They are ghosts moving through a space where the laws of physics have entirely broken down. Furthermore, the figure is positioned with their back to us. In art history, a figure seen from behind is known as a Rückenfigur. It is a device used to invite the viewer to place themselves in the shoes of the character, looking out at the landscape with them. But Böcklin subverts this entirely. We are not in the boat, we are left behind. We are standing on an invisible shore, completely unable to intervene, helplessly watching as someone we love, or perhaps our own soul, slips away toward a shore from which no one ever returns. The tall cypress trees block the center of the island, acting like a solid wall, denying us the revelation of what actually lies inside the burial chambers. We are allowed to approach the mystery of death, but we are emphatically denied the answers. Arnold Böcklin did not set out to create a psychological test for the 20th century's most notorious minds. He did not intend to summarize the existential dread of the industrial age, nor did he plan to map the deep, dark waters of the human death drive. He simply set out to paint a picture for a widow to dream over. But in his refusal to explain, in his masterful engineering of negative space and visual silence, he created a vessel. The Isle of the Dead remains a monumental mirror. It reflects our grief, our nihilism, our exhaustion, and our deepest unspoken fears of what waits for us in the dark. The boat is always approaching, the figure never turns around, and the island, silent and indifferent, is always waiting.